Something I've noticed in recent videos is that some people are unsure about web servers and why you need them, especially when your web pages don't load properly without one. Some of you have even helped out by pointing people in the right direction, and in this video we're going to build on these responses and take a look at the topic of web servers, different types, pros and cons of different web servers, as well as talking through my setup and how I use one. So first off, I'll give you some background information for anyone who isn't quite sure what a web server is. When you type an address into your browser, that address tells your computer where you want to load a web page from. Just like if you visit a friend, so you tell a taxi driver your friend's address and they take you to your friend's apartment building. When you get to your friend's apartment building, then what? Your friend doesn't know that you're there, so you go in, and in this example you're going to speak to a receptionist. You tell them that you're there to see your friend, and so the receptionist invites you in and tells you that your friend is in the garden. In this example, the web server is like the knowledge that the receptionist has, that when you go to the desk, they should ask who you're visiting. After all, they don't want to just let anyone into the building. The web server also knows that it needs to ask who you are there to see, and checking whether they're available. In the web server's case, it needs to know which file you want to see, whether it's a home page, a style sheet, a JavaScript file, or anything else. It checks whether the file or the friend is available, and if so, it gives you the information you wanted, which your computer then downloads and displays as a web page. You can of course load web pages without running a web server, and without the receptionist you may be able to find the individual person you're looking for, but you don't necessarily know where they live, and you might find them wandering a corridor, for example. This is especially important when you're working with JSON in particular. You need to know that JSON files are actually intended to be connected to other files. If the browser doesn't know that multiple files are all part of one website, it's likely to not load them properly deliberately to avoid things like cross-site scripting. So now that we know what a web server does, what web servers are available and why should you choose one instead of another? In general, web servers fall into two categories. Production web servers, which are the web servers that all websites which are available on the internet are hosted on, and development web servers, which are used during the development process of sites, which will eventually be moved onto production servers when the website goes live. Because development web servers are used when you are creating websites, they give you a lot more feedback about the code you are writing, often called debug mode, which you can use to make your site run better. When your website is live, however, you don't want to waste time with all of this feedback from your server. Any problems should have been fixed during the development process, and so debug mode is normally disabled on production web servers, which makes them run more quickly. So let's take a look at some of the web servers out there. In the production space, there are three main different programs used as web servers: Apache, Nginx, and IIS. There are hundreds if not thousands of other production servers, but these are the main ones in use right now, and they're the ones that we're going to focus on. Nginx is designed from the ground up to be super fast when it comes to serving static web pages, so that's things like HTML and JavaScript, things that the web server can just give to your browser and forget about. Apache, on the other hand, is still quick, but it's much more about pre-processing pages. So if you write a PHP web page, the PHP file itself is never actually returned to the browser. The file is basically just a set of instructions that the web server needs to follow to generate a web page, and it is that generated web page which is then given back to the browser. And the fact that Apache is better at doing all of these pre-processing tasks makes it much slower than Nginx. Microsoft's IIS is similar to Apache in that it's more about pre-processing than Nginx is. But the real reason people use IIS is because of Microsoft's product support, which means that if something does go wrong with the web server, you can call Microsoft and they will help you fix it. That's not really the case for Apache or Nginx in the same way. In the developmental server world, we also have things like Apache, Nginx, and IIS, although the settings are tweaked to be more useful for the developers, so turning debug mode on. But we also have a whole lot more specialty web servers as well. I'm not even going to begin to try to name them all, but consider the fact that at one point during the Polymer series, we used a web server called Polyserve, which is a web server configured to help developing Polymer elements. Having web servers specific to individual purposes like that isn't particularly uncommon, so you can begin to imagine just how many different servers exist. So what web server do I use for a typical stretch project video? I typically use a program called XAMPP, which uses Apache as the actual web server. Apache on its own is normally a command line program, and XAMPP gives you a graphical interface so that you can turn your web server on and off with a single button, as well as including other tools and programs you would commonly use when developing a website, such as the PHP programming language. So let's look at the most basic setup. If you download and install XAMPP, start it up, and start Apache, then type localhost into your browser, you'll see a welcome page from XAMPP. You obviously don't want to just run a web server to see a welcome page, so find where XAMPP is installed. For me this is XAMPP, but it may be in C program files XAMPP for you, and you will see a folder called htdocs. This folder contains all of the files that you can see at localhost in your browser, so you can see that we have a folder called dashboard, which contains an index file. If we try to go to this folder in our browser, we'll see the contents of that index page. If you're just planning on developing one website, the easiest thing to get your site up and running is simply to delete everything from within the htdocs folder and begin to create your website from within there. If you've downloaded a template for your website from somewhere else, you can just copy and paste the files here and they'll show up when you refresh your browser. At this point we're quite close to my setup, but there is one more difference. When I want to work on more than one website at a time, I don't want to delete one website and then replace it with another every single time. That would be far too time consuming and could very easily lead to mistakes. You may have noticed that the address I use in my videos is very rarely localhost. Instead it might be something like polymerprojects.dev or sudoku.dev or something else.dev. These aren't domain names that I've bought. If you look at my actual htdocs folder, you'll see something that looks like this. One folder for each separate project. So I'm going to show you how you can have one folder for each website and create unique domain names for them all without actually buying a domain name, although this is definitely an optional step. There's nothing wrong with working on one website at a time if that's what you want to do. To use custom domain names, you need to edit two files. But before we do, I just want to show you that I've created a folder called project in the htdocs folder, and it just contains one file called index.html, which is what we're going to use to test that we've added this new website. So the first file we need to edit is called hosts, and if you're using Windows, it's located in C, Windows, System32, drivers, etc. So go ahead and open that file with a text editor, and you'll see it say something like this. All we're going to do is add a new line to the bottom which begins 127.0.0.1, then a space or two, the exact number doesn't matter, and then an address that we want to use to access our website. I normally put something like project followed by .dev, but you can call it anything you want. Be sensible though, because if you add something like google.com in here, you're not going to be able to access the actual google.com without editing this file again first. So what's happening here is instead of telling the taxi driver your friend's address, you're instead giving the taxi driver a note which says that whenever you ask to go to your friend's apartment again, you actually mean to go to this specific address. Or in our case, whenever I ask to go to project.dev, take me to 127.0.0.1. So now that we have our taxi ride in place, we need to make sure that the receptionist at our friend's apartment building knows that there are multiple people who are going to be living there, or we're going to have multiple sites running on the same web server. To do this, we need to open a file called http-vhosts.conf, which looks something like this, and is found under the XAMPP folder under Apache conf extra. So for me, that is XAMPP Apache conf extra. If you scroll down, you will see something that looks like this section here called virtual host, which has a property called document root, which points at your htdocs folder you've been using so far, and the server name property is set to localhost. Let's make a copy of this entire section and paste it directly below, except this time we're going to change the server name to project.dev, And we're also going to change the documents route to the folder inside of htdocs called project that we created earlier before saving the file. We're then going to stop the Apache web server if it's currently running and start it again. In a web browser, we can then type project.dev into the address bar, which is going to take us to the page in the project folder. If you don't see your page load as you would expect, check the webservers.conf file and make sure that you've capitalized all of the sections properly. Some versions of Apache are very picky about this. So you hopefully now have some idea of the purpose of a web server, how to set one up, and how to get your setup as close as possible to mine, which will hopefully make it easier for you when you're working on your own website and your own projects, or following along with some of the projects we create on the channel. What do you think of this video? Has it been helpful? Have you learned something new? Let me know in the comments, hit that subscribe button and check out some of these other videos.